They say you should be careful what you wish for. I guess I'm learning that the hard way. My name is Ethan Vance, and for the last 3 weeks, I've been the sole keeper of the Blackwood Rock Lighthouse. It sounds like something out of an old novel, doesn't it? That was part of the appeal, I suppose. My life back on the mainland had become a monotonous cycle of work, sleep, and staring at screens. I needed a change. Something drastic, something real. When I saw the posting, Lighthouse Keeper, Blackwood Rock. Solitude guaranteed. Resilience essential. Something in me just clicked. Maybe it was the romantic notion of being a sentinel against the storm, a lone guardian of the light. Or maybe I was just running from the quiet desperation of an ordinary life that felt increasingly like a cage. The journey out here was an overture to the isolation. A small, weathered fishing boat, skippered by a man whose vocabulary seemed limited to grunts and nods, cut through choppy, gray waters for the better part of 6 hours. The mainland dissolved into a hazy line, then vanished. When Blackwood Rock finally emerged from the mist, it was less an island and more a jagged black tooth jutting from an angry sea. And perched atop it, defiant and stark, was the lighthouse. It was older than I'd imagined. Its stone walls, streaked with decades of salt and storm, looking almost skeletal against the bruised sky. There was a grim majesty to it, a sense of enduring history, but also a palpable air of neglect, as if it had been forgotten by the world it was meant to serve. The skipper, old Silas, helped me haul my meager supplies up the slipper stone steps carved into the rock face. He didn't say much, just pointed to the heavy oak door of the keeper's cottage adjoining the tower. Radio works. Mostly. Supply boat in a month. Don't go swimming. With that, he was gone, his boat a dwindling speck on the turbulent water, leaving me utterly alone. The cottage was rustic. Dust lay thick on every surface, the air heavy with the smell of damp stone, old brine, and something else, something faintly metallic, and unsettling I couldn't quite place. It was furnished sparsely, a narrow cot, a rickety table and chair, a small wood burning stove. Signs of previous inhabitants were scarce. A few faded magazines from years ago, a rusty can opener, a single, worn-out boot tucked under the cot. The silence, once Silas's engine faded, was absolute. Not the peaceful, meditative silence I'd craved, but a heavy, pressing void that seemed to swallow sound. The only interruptions were the mournful cries of gulls and the relentless rhythm of waves crashing against the rock, a sound that felt less like nature and more like the island breathing, a slow, deliberate sigh. The first few days were a blur of settling in, learning the routines of the light. The lamp mechanism was ancient but functional, a magnificent array of brass and glass that required constant tending. I swept, I cleaned, I organized. I tried to establish a rhythm, a sense of order in my new, solitary world. But the quiet was different. It wasn't just an absence of noise, it was an entity in itself. It seeped into my bones, made the creak of a floorboard under my own weight sound like a gunshot. The wind, when it picked up, didn't just whistle around the tower, it seemed to whisper, carrying faint, unintelligible murmurs that I'd dismiss as tricks of the air currents. The first truly odd thing happened on the fourth night. I'd made a point of locking the heavy wooden door to the lantern room at the top of the tower before coming down for the night. I was certain of it. It was part of my meticulous new routine. Yet, when I woke just before dawn, a sliver of unease pulling me from sleep, I found the door ajar, a faint, cold draft snaking down the spiral stairs. I told myself I must have been tired, mistaken, but a seed of doubt was planted. Then came the shadows, fleeting things, at the very edge of my vision. A flicker in the periphery as I was reading by the stove, a darker patch in a dim corner that would vanish when I looked directly at it. My eyes playing tricks on me, I reasoned. The low light, the isolation. Perfectly normal. A couple of days later, I was in the small kitchen area, making coffee. I'd left my battered copy of Moby Dick on the table, face down, marking my page. When I turned back from the stove, the book was closed, sitting neatly at the center of the table. My heart hammered. I was the only living soul on this rock. There were no drafts strong enough inside cottage to move a heavy book like that. I spent a good hour searching the tiny cottage, my breath catching in my throat, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. I found nothing, no explanation. It was later that week, while searching for spare wicks for the lamp in a damp storage closet at the base of the tower, that I found the logbook. It was tucked away beneath a pile of rotting canvas, its leather cover warped and stained by seawater, the pages brittle and yellowed. The earliest entries, dating back decades, were mundane weather reports, shipping sightings, maintenance notes. The handwriting was neat, methodical. But as I flipped through the years, the entries became different. One keeper, a man named Arthur Penwright, who served in the 70s, began to note unusual luminescence from the water on moonless nights. Later, his entries grew more agitated. The light plays tricks. I see faces in the beam. Or are they in my head? His handwriting became spidery, erratic. He mentioned sounds. A dragging, like stone on stone, coming from beneath the cottage. Another keeper from the early 90s, a Thomas Ashton, wrote of a presence. His entries were short, terse. It watches. I feel it in the stones, in the wind. He described the main lamp extinguishing itself for no reason, only to reignite moments later, its beam a sickly, unfamiliar color. The silence is the worst, he wrote. It's waiting. The final entries from Ashton were almost illegible, smeared as if written with a trembling hand. It knows my name, whispers it from the walls. The sea is calling. The last page was just a single, jagged line trailing off into nothing. A chill, deeper than the damp of the stone, settled over me. These men, decades apart, described things unnervingly similar to the subtle disturbances I was beginning to experience. The moving objects, the feeling of being watched, the unsettling behavior of the light itself. Was this island a magnet for madness? Or was there something genuinely, terribly wrong with Blackwood Rock? I tried to shake it off. Stress, solitude, the power of suggestion from reading that damned logbook. I redoubled my efforts to maintain normalcy, to stick to my routines, to rationalize every creak, every shadow. But the logbook's words echoed in my mind, a persistent, nagging whisper. The event that shattered my carefully constructed denial happened 2 nights ago. A storm had blown in, one of those savage Atlantic furies that makes you feel like the world is ending. Wind howled like a banshee around the tower, and rain lashed against the lantern glass with the force of thrown gravel. I was in the lantern room, checking the rotation, the great lamp casting its sweeping beam out into the maelstrom. Suddenly, the mechanism groaned, a sound like tortured metal, and stuttered to a halt. The light froze, pointing directly back towards the island, towards the keeper's cottage. My cottage. My blood ran cold. I manually tried the crank. It wouldn't budge. It was seized solid. Then, the quality of the light changed. The brilliant white softened, then intensified into a piercing, almost unbearable crimson. It pulsed, once, twice, bathing the interior of the lantern room in a hellish glow. And in that crimson light, for a fraction of a second, I saw it. Reflected in the huge, curved glass of the lantern, superimposed over my own terrified face, was another. Pale, gaunt, with eyes like hollow pits, and a rictus grin that was all wrong, too wide, too sharp. It wasn't just a reflection. It was behind the glass, out in the storm, looking in. I screamed, stumbling back, tripping over a coil of rope. When I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding like a trapped bird, it was gone. The light was white again, the mechanism slowly, groaning, beginning to turn. The beam swept back out to sea as if nothing had happened. I don't know how long I stayed up there, shaking, staring out into the storm, lashed darkness. Eventually, the rational part of my brain, the part that was desperately clinging to sanity, tried to reassert itself. A reflection. A trick of the light, the storm, my overwrought imagination, stress, fatigue. But then I remembered the logbook. Thomas Ashton's words, "The light plays tricks. I see faces in the beam." I'm not imagining things. The logbook isn't just a collection of ghost stories. It's a warning. And whatever haunted Arthur Penrite and Thomas, Ashton is still here. It's on Blackwood Rock. And I think it knows I'm here too. The isolation I craved now feels like a trap, and the silence is no longer empty. It's listening. The storm raged for another full day, a relentless assault that kept me confined mostly to the cottage. Sleep was a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that pale, grinning face, superimposed over my own reflection in the lantern glass, burned itself onto the inside of my eyelids. The crimson light. It felt like I'd stared into the very heart of whatever malevolence haunted Blackwood Rock. I kept telling myself it was the storm, the stress, the isolation finally cracking me open. But the cold certainty in my gut, the primal fear that had seized me in that moment, refused to be rationalized away. When the storm finally broke, leaving behind a bruised, weeping sky and an unnervingly calm sea, the silence that descended was worse than the tempest's fury. It was a heavy, watchful silence, the kind that amplifies every tiny sound, the drip of water from the eaves, the scuttling of a mouse in the walls, the frantic beat of my own heart. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the island itself was holding its breath, waiting. My first instinct was to get to the radio in the small utility room off the kitchen. I hadn't touched it since Silas, the boatman, had grunted about its intermittent functionality. Now, it was my only lifeline. I flicked the power switch, and a crackle of static filled the small room. Hope flickered. I grabbed the microphone, my hand trembling. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Blackwood Rock Lighthouse. Is anyone receiving? Over. Static. Only static. I tried again, my voice rising in pitch.
Mayday! Blackwood Rock Lighthouse! Requesting immediate assistance!
Is anyone there? Over. The static hissed, then, for a horrifying moment, it coalesced. A sound emerged, not a voice, but a low, guttural breathing, interspersed with a soft, wet clicking. It was close, as if someone was breathing directly into their own microphone, listening. Then, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it, slithered through the static, cold and ancient. Stay with us, Ethan. My name. It knew my name. The same way it had known Thomas Ashton's. I slammed the microphone back onto its cradle, a strangled cry escaping my lips. My blood felt like ice water in my veins. I stumbled back from the radio, a profound sense of dread washing over me. It wasn't just on the island. It was in the very airwaves, capable of twisting my only link to the outside, whirled into another instrument of its terror. The logbook became my grim companion, my only source of potential understanding. I pored over the brittle pages again, searching for anything I might have missed, any clue to what I was facing. Arthur Penwright's entries about the usual luminescence from the water took on a new significance after the crimson light I'd witnessed. He'd also written about dreams, vivid and disturbing, of being pulled down into the cold, dark depths surrounding the rock. The sea calls, he'd scrawled, his handwriting becoming increasingly agitated. It wants something. Thomas Ashton's entries were even more chilling in light of my own experiences. The whispers are clearer now. They promise things: release, an end to the loneliness. He wrote of the main lamp moving on its own, not just stopping, but sometimes focusing its beam on a specific empty patch of churning water at the base of the cliffs, as if trying to illuminate something hidden beneath the waves. It shows me where they wait. One entry read, the ink smudged and desperate. The dragging sound Penwright had mentioned, like stone on stone. I started hearing it, usually at night when the wind died down. A slow, rhythmic scraping that seemed to emanate from beneath the cottage, or perhaps from the very foundations of the tower itself. It was a sound that spoke of immense weight, of relentless effort. I'd lie on my cot, rigid, listening to it, imagining vast, unseen things moving in the darkness below. My rational mind tried to tell me it was the tide shifting rocks, the island settling. But the sound was too deliberate, too purposeful. The shadows in the periphery of my vision were no longer fleeting. They lingered, taking on vague, unsettling shapes. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the darkened corners of the cottage, a tall, attenuated silhouette that would melt away if I turned too quickly. The feeling of being watched was constant, a suffocating pressure on my senses. I started talking to myself, just to break the oppressive silence, to hear a human voice, even if it was only my own, increasingly strained and fearful. One afternoon, driven by a desperate need to do something, to find some tangible evidence, I decided to explore the base of the island more thoroughly. The storm had receded the tide further than usual, exposing a wider stretch of black, seaweed-strewn rocks. I armed myself with a heavy iron poker. From the stove, a pathetic defense. I knew, but it offered a sliver of comfort. The air at the water's edge was thick with the smell of brine and decay. As I picked my way over the slippery stones, I noticed strange markings etched into some of the larger boulders, half hidden by kelp. They weren't natural formations. They were symbols, crude and geometric, unlike anything I'd ever seen. They looked ancient, almost primal. Some resembled distorted eyes, others, grasping claws or coiling tentacles. A cold dread trickled down my spine. Who had made these? And why? Then I saw it. Tucked into a crevice between two massive slicked rocks almost hidden from view, was a small, dark opening. A cave, or perhaps just a deep fissure. It was the dragging sound that drew my attention to it. First, a faint echo of that subterranean scraping, as if originating from within. And something else, a faint, metallic, coppery scent. The same unsettling smell I'd noticed in the cottage when I first arrived, but stronger here, mixed with the low tide stench of the sea. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run to the relative safety of the tower. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need for answers, propelled me forward. I approached the opening cautiously, poker held ready. The darkness within was absolute. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting a nervous swath into the black. The cave wasn't deep, more of a narrow, damp passage that sloped downwards. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air was cold, heavy. And the dragging sound was louder here, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic dripping. As I ventured further, the beam of my flashlight fell upon something that made me recoil. A gasp catching in my throat. Bones. Piles of them. Mostly animal, by the look of it, seabirds, fish, the skeletal remains of seals. But then, among them, something else. Smaller, more delicate, and unmistakably human. A rib cage, a femur, a scattering of vertebrae. They were old, yellowed, and encrusted with sea salt. Some bore strange marks, as if gnawed or scraped. And beneath one pile, I saw a glint of metal. I reached out a trembling hand and picked it up. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped. I managed to pry it open. Inside, faded and water-stained, were two miniature portraits. A man and a woman, their faces solemn, dressed in clothes from a bygone era. The dragging sound came again, closer this time, from deeper within the passage, followed by a soft, wet sigh. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I scrambled backwards, dropping the locket, slipping on the wet stones, the flashlight beam dancing wildly. I didn't stop running until I reached the stone steps, leading back up to the cottage. My lungs burning, my mind reeling. That night, the activity in the cottage escalated. The temperature plummeted. Even with the stove burning, objects moved not just subtly, but with a terrifying deliberateness. My copy of Moby Dick flew off the table, its pages fluttering like a dying bird. The rusty can opener I'd seen on my first day rattled violently in its drawer. And the whispers, they were no longer just at the edge of hearing. They were in the room with me, swirling around me, cold and insistent, calling my name, promising an end to the fear, an end to the solitude, if I would just join them. Join it. I barricaded the door with the rickety chair and huddled on the cot, the iron poker clutched in my white, knuckled grip. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the entity on Blackwood Rock was no longer content to just watch and wait. It was actively trying to break me down, to lure me in, just as it had lured the keepers before me. The faces in the logbook, Penwright and Ashton, their descent into madness and despair, I was walking their path. The light in the tower, my responsibility, my beacon against the darkness, now felt like a malevolent eye, its beam sweeping out to sea, then back towards the island, a silent, searching gaze. And I couldn't shake the horrifying thought that wasn't just searching the sea. It was searching for me. And sooner or later, it was going to find what it was looking for. The supply boat was still weeks away. Weeks. An eternity on Blackwood Rock. The barricaded door of the cottage felt like a paper, thin shield against the pressing dark. Sleep was an impossibility. Every creak of the old structure, every sigh of the wind, was magnified into a monstrous footfall, a sibilant whisper. The iron poker was a cold, heavy weight in my sweating palms, a pathetic talisman against the intangible dread that filled the small room. The whispers were constant now, no longer just at the edge of hearing, but seemingly emanating from the very stones around me, from the air I breathed. Ethan, join us. It's so cold out there, so alone. They were insidious, playing on the raw wound of my isolation. The very reason I'd sought this cursed rock. Hours passed in a fever dream of terror. The dragging sound returned, louder than ever, a grinding, rhythmic scraping from beneath the floorboards. It was as if something immense, something impossibly heavy, was being laboriously pulled across the rock directly under me. With each scrape, the floor vibrated, and a fine dust sifted down from the ceiling beams. I imagined the human bones I'd found in the cave, wondered if this was the sound of them being rearranged, or worse, added to. Sometime before dawn, a new element entered the cacophony, a soft, almost melodic humming. It was faint at first, weaving through the whispers and the dragging, but it grew in intensity, a deeply resonant thrum that vibrated in my chest, in my teeth. It was a sound that felt ancient, primal, and utterly alien. And with it, a faint, sickly sweet odor, like overripe fruit mixed with the coppery tang of blood, began to permeate the cottage. I couldn't stay in the cottage. It felt like a tomb, the walls closing in. The entity, whatever it was no longer content with subtle hauntings. It was laying siege. My only hope, if any remained, lay in understanding. The logbook, the cave. With a surge of desperate adrenaline, I kicked the chair away from the door and flung it open. The pre-dawn air was frigid, the sky a deep, starless indigo. The lighthouse tower loomed over me, a silent, black sentinel. The main lamp was dark. That was wrong. Terribly wrong. It was my duty to keep it lit, no matter what. But a deeper, more primal fear kept me from ascending those spiral stairs just yet. Flashlight in hand, poker still gripped tight, I stumbled towards the path leading down to the island's base, towards the cave. The strange symbols I'd seen, etched into the rocks, seemed to glow faintly in the beam of my flashlight. Their disturbing geometries more pronounced, more malevolent. The humming was stronger here, and the dragging sound seemed to be coming directly from the fissure I'd found. I forced myself to enter the narrow passage. The smell was overpowering. The beam of my flashlight cut through the oppressive darkness, falling again on the piles of bones. They seemed disturbed, shifted, and there were more of them. Fresh ones, seabirds mostly, their feathers still clinging to broken wings, but also something larger. Mammalian, half submerged in a dark, viscous pool that hadn't been there before. My light found the tarnished silver locket I'd dropped. I picked it up. Its cold metal a stark contrast to my fevered skin. As my fingers closed around it, the humming intensified to a painful pitch, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Images flooded my mind, unbidden, terrifyingly vivid. A woman with eyes like the locket's, faded portraits, screaming, dragged towards the churning water by shadowy, indistinct forms. A man, perhaps her husband, fighting, then falling. The crimson light pulsing from the depths. The whispers, promising, cajoling. It was a vision of utter despair, of a past tragedy that had stained this rock to its core. The dragging sound erupted from deeper in the cave. A final, shuddering scrape, followed by a profound, echoing silence. And then, a new sound. A wet, tearing noise. I had to get out. I scrambled back, gasping for breath, the locket clutched in my hand. As I emerged from the cave, the first hint of dawn was painting the eastern horizon a bruised purple. And the main lamp of the lighthouse suddenly blazed to life. But it wasn't the brilliant white light it was supposed to be. It was crimson. A pulsing, malevolent crimson that bathed the entire island in its hellish glow, just as I'd seen it that night in the storm. I looked up at the lantern room, my heart a block of ice, and I saw it. Not a reflection this time. Standing on the narrow walkway outside the lantern glass, silhouetted against the blood-red light, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It was the face from my nightmares. The face from the reflection, but now fully manifest. Its eyes were hollow pits that seemed to drink the crimson light, and its rictus grin stretched impossibly wide. It raised one elongated, claw-like hand and beckoned to me. The whispers swirled around me, no longer cajoling, but demanding, "Join us, Keeper." The radio. My last, desperate thought. If I could just send a message. Any message. I sprinted back to the cottage, bursting through the door into the utility room. I grabbed the microphone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it.
Mayday! Mayday! Blackwood Rock! It's here! It's real.
For God's sake, someone. The radio crackled, and then a voice, clear and cold, and chillingly familiar, came through the speaker. It was Silas, the old boatman. But his voice was different, flat, devoid of emotion. No one is coming for you, Ethan. Then, another voice joined his, a chorus of voices, male, female, young, old, all speaking in that same dead monotone. You are one of us now. The light must be kept. The sea must be fed. I dropped the microphone. The locket fell from my other hand, clattering onto the stone floor. The crimson light from the tower pulsed, flooding the small room. I could feel a profound change happening within me, a coldness spreading from my core, extinguishing the last embers of fear, of hope, of self. The loneliness I had craved was being filled, but not with peace, with them. My gaze fell upon the old logbook, lying open on the rickety table where I'd left it. The last entry from Thomas Ashton, that jagged, trailing line, I understood now. I picked up the pen, my hand surprisingly steady. The whispers were inside my head now, guiding my thoughts, my words. It wasn't a struggle anymore. It was an acceptance. My name is Ethan Vance. I am the keeper of the Blackwood Rock Lighthouse. The isolation isn't so bad once you get used to it. The light is beautiful, especially when it's red. It shows you things. Wonderful, terrible things. The sea calls, and we must answer. The supply boat will find the lighthouse well tended. They always do. They'll find the logbook too, with my neat, new entry. Perhaps they'll wonder about the faint, coppery smell, or the way the shadows in the corners seem to lengthen and deepen, even in daylight. Perhaps they'll even find the locket, another small trinket for the collection. They'll send another keeper, eventually, someone looking for solitude, someone resilient, and will be waiting.